Welcome in to the 48 Minutes podcast on Believe, presented by BetOnline. I'm Ross Geiger, the former NBA video coordinator, having spent time with the Suns, Bucks, and Knicks, and I'm joined alongside Bruce Bernstein, our four-time Emmy Award winner who spent more than 3 decades at ESPN producing NBA shows, SportsCenter, and soaking up knowledge from the best hoop analysts in the business. And we're also joined by the 2-time Emmy Award winner, Michael Worldby Freer, who is a senior writer at Stat Factor, specializing in writing advanced statistical NBA reports for various announcers across the league. This is episode number 124, the Tom Chambers episode, as the former Suns forward and current TV analyst has his number 24 retired by the Phoenix Suns. Before we get started with tonight's show, just a quick reminder, BetOnline is the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for everything football. BetOnline has every stat, every matchup, and even live odds and spreads to be on during the games. Think you know your stuff? Get in on our 200,000 mega contest and pick 5 games against the spread every week for your chance at weekly prizes and a share of 200,000. When the game's over, head on over to our online casino and get in on a game of blackjack or poker, or unwind with one of our over 150 slot games. Head to the website today to get in on the action. BetOnline, the game starts here. And Bruce, I'll start with you here tonight as the basketball world got some devastating news this morning.
Yeah, Ross. Hall of Famer Dikembe Mutombo died on Monday at the age of 58. It's not nearly enough to call him an all-time great player. He is an all-time great human being. Everyone remembers him as the finger-wagging shot blocker yelling, "No, no, no," to those who challenged him in the paint. Some older fans remember him as one of the 3 great Georgetown centers, along with Patrick Ewing and Alonzo Mourning. But one of my enduring memories of him is the shot of him flat on his back celebrating the 8th-seeded Nuggets playoff comeback from down 0-2 against the top-seeded Sonics in the 1994 playoffs. The look of sheer joy on his face is one of the lasting images burned into my NBA brain. But while all of his achievements on the court are well known, it was his work off the court that made him such a magnificent human being. His charity work across Africa and in his native Congo included building hospitals and other facilities to help his countrymen. I remember my former colleague Jalen Rose telling me one time that Dikembe asked him to help out, and Jalen responded by making a donation. I won't say how much, but it was a lot, in order to build one of the operating rooms in the hospital. It has his name on the operating room door. I have no doubt Mutombo made similar requests to many other NBA family members, and they surely responded with great generosity. Dikembe Mutombo battled brain cancer since 2022, and he finally lost his fight. But the legacy he leaves as a humanitarian and a player who thrilled us for 18 seasons will never be forgotten. Rest easy, Dikembe. Your work here is done, but your memory inspires all of us.
Well said there, Bruce. Worldby, real quickly here, do you have any fond memories of Dikembe?
Just him as a defender, on the court. He was one of the defining players of the 1990s era defensively. It was the most defensive era in the NBA history that decade, and he was a defining player in that. It's 4-time Defensive Player of the Year. Only 2 other players have ever done that. So he has a lasting legacy on the court for sure.
Yeah, and definitely off as well with all the work that he did in the Congo and along Africa. So our thoughts and prayers go out to Dikembe, and Bruce, well done there. Now, getting to the NBA season, we got a nice surprise this past weekend as we had a big trade over the weekend, and boy, was I surprised by it. The Minnesota Timberwolves decided to trade their former number 1 overall pick, Karl Anthony-Towns, to the New York Knicks in exchange for Julius Randle, Dante DiVincenzo, RIP to the short-lived Villanova 4, and a first-round pick via Detroit. So let's dive right into what this trade means for both teams, and we'll start with Worldby's Knicks. So, Worldby, I give the floor to you here. I mean, how surprised were you, and how are you feeling about Cat joining the Knicks?
I was a little bit surprised. They had been coveting him for a few years. You heard the rumors, but it seemed like they would stand, try with this Villanova group. It all seemed like that. The Mitchell Robinson injury news probably sped up the process on acquiring him. It's for me, I'm excited about it. The Knicks are clearly going into trying to use the formula that was successful for the Celtics, for the Mavericks, for the Warriors, and that is all threes all the time. They were ninth in the league last season. The Knicks were in percentage of points that came from 3-point range. I would expect that to be in the top 5 this season. They're getting, never mind that he calls himself the greatest 3-point shooting big man of all time. The numbers are the numbers. He's a 40% career 3-point shooter. And the only issue with this whole thing is, can he stay healthy? He's only played 70 games in a season once in the last 5 years. So they're dealing with an injury situation with Mitchell Robinson, who reportedly may be on the trading block. And now they're bringing in a guy whose injury history is suspect, to say the least.
And Bruce, when it comes to Cat here, we talked all offseason long about the pay cut Jalen Brunson took and having one big swing that they're able to take on either free agency or on a trade. Well, they just did that with getting Karl Anthony-Towns. So my question to you is this: was this the right guy?
Well, Cat played center his first 7 seasons, but he played power forward the previous 2 with Rudy Gobert on the team. He was a double-digit rebounder as a center, but only averaged around 8 as a power forward as he kind of moved outside and started shooting more, threes. So the question as he enters his 10th NBA season, which is hard to believe, we think about Karl Anthony-Towns as still a young player. This will be his 10th NBA season. Will he handle the change in position smoothly? And are they going to want him to be out there shooting as many threes? Because we know that, Robinson blocks shots, gets rebounds. Hartenstein got rebounds. If Towns is not in there getting rebounds, I'm not certain if that is exactly the right fit. But listen, Tom Thibodeau knows what he's doing. He's going to figure something out. They're going to make this thing work one way or another. I think it's great for Cat. He grew up in New Jersey. Essentially, he's back home. Their starting lineup is going to basically be Cat, Bridges, Anunoby, Hart, and Brunson. This team should be sponsored by Hot Wings because they have such a great selection of them. And off the bench, They got Campaign, Miles McBride, Precious Achiuwa, Jericho Sims. Look, I think on balance, I would have to give it a thumbs up for the Knicks. This is the kind of swing you got to take if you want to go and get Boston, who you finished 14 games in back of last season. Getting Bridges got him a little bit closer. This gets him even a bit more closer. So we'll see. But I would say if I'm a Knicks fan, I'm over the moon with this.
And with this, my only thing is, fair or unfair, Cat has carried the label as soft throughout his career. And now he's playing for probably the hardest-nosed coach out there, Tom Thibodeau, who obviously likes aggressive defense, guys that are willing to stick their nose in there to grab rebounds. Any concerns with that will be just as far as his personality meshing with Thibodeau?
I don't know if necessarily personality meshing. I think, this could be Cat's best chance, with all due respect to last season, how great a run Minnesota had. This may be his best chance to get to a NBA Finals on a loaded team. I would think that would inspire him to want to do everything possible. That means whatever role Tibbs has him doing. I agree with Bruce. You'd like to see him, now he's essentially going to be in the middle. He has to, let's see him grab the rebounds that he used to grab when he was playing in the middle primarily. I seem to think it all seems to be that formula where we're just going to throw up a bunch of three. We saw how Boston handled it last season or last couple of seasons, really. We've seen how Golden State does it. We've seen how the Mavericks do it. And it's proven to be a success. Now you got to make them. But I think if, with a guy like this, he creates big time problems on the offensive end. We'll see how it factors in on the defensive end.
Now, Bruce, care to comment on just kind of the offensive spacing now with Karl Anthony-Towns? Obviously, another shooter, one of the best 3-point big men in the game. Seems to match up pretty nicely with your Boston Celtics having Kristaps Porzingis. Are you looking forward or anticipating the Knicks playing a lot of the same offensive sets as your Boston Celtics next year?
Yeah, I mean, look, Brunson shoots some threes, not a ton. Towns kind of automatically becomes their best 3-point shooter. The question is, do you want him taking the most 3-point shots on your team? So that part, I really think they're going to have to sort of work out. But like any good team, I mean, look, they'll figure out ways to score. They just have to figure out what their defense is going to be. Is Cat going to be that presence in the middle? Is he going to be a Mitchell Robinson, Isaiah Hartenstein type of a space eater in the middle? Or is he going to be, as you said, more of a softie, as he's been criticized for along the way? I mean, look, when Rudy Gobert came to Minnesota, they became one of the greatest defensive teams statistically in the league last year. But it wasn't because of Cat.
Yeah. Now, last question here for you. It's kind of twofold here. Number one, would you be surprised at all if Josh Hart leads the Knicks in rebounding next year as the roster currently stands? And number two, do you think Karl Anthony-Towns can handle the New York media? He's coming from Minnesota, and he's going to be, expected to fill big shoes in New York and deliver for the Knicks next year. So do you think he can handle the pressure that comes with playing in Madison Square?
To answer your first question, I would be surprised if Josh Hart led the team in rebounds, simply because I think by being in the middle and playing the 5, Karl Anthony-Towns should be able to get more rebounds than he had the last couple of years. He hadn't averaged even 9 rebounds each of the last 2 seasons. I would expect that to be closer to double digits. I don't see, as great a rebounder as Josh Hart is, I don't see him grabbing that many rebounds. He could, but I don't see it that way. The media thing is going to be a problem. What happens if they start 10-11 on the season and Karl Anthony-Towns is averaging 15 and 8? That's not what they brought him here, and now he's going to have to answer those questions. But he played a year at Kentucky. They're pretty serious about their basketball down there, so he's had to deal with pressure before, and I at the end of the day, he's one of 10 all time to average 22 and 10 for a career. So he's got the numbers. If he does what he's been doing, steps up a little bit on the rebounding side, I think this is going to work out big time for the Knicks.
Do we think that Cat has the killer instinct? Because he's always seemed to me as sort of a kind of an easygoing sort of a guy. I mean, super talented, seemingly a good teammate. But I never really saw anything resembling like grit out of that guy. And the Knicks are a gritty team. I mean, hopefully he's going to, increase his grit level. But that's a question that I have about him. I mean, is he like a little bit too nice to be a badass 5, or is he going to be able to step up?
That's a big question there, Bruce. And I think he definitely needs to show that this year to fit in with the roster the Knicks have and the personalities that they have on the court. My only concern with that is Karl Anthony-Towns, when he has played the 5 in the past, and even just this past year, even being a 4 next to Rudy Gobert, he sometimes gets into foul trouble early, and that's really kind of hurt him later on in big games with the Minnesota Timberwolves. So how he navigates that in New York is going to be a big question too, because if he's back to playing the 5, I would surely expect teams like Philly with Joel Embiid really trying to expose him in the paint. Giannis, I used to think Julius Randle, and obviously now with OG Anunoby, they've got another solution for him. But I know Giannis has handled Karl Anthony-Towns in the past. So how are those specific type matchups, big time games in the Eastern Conference, going to work out for Cat trying to play defense within Tom Thibodeau's system?
I'll tell you what, you're absolutely right. And the one person outside of New York that was looking his chops over this news was the guy you mentioned, Joel Embiid. He has had his way in his career against Karl Anthony-Towns. The numbers are just dominated for him. They're dominating no matter who he plays, really. But
Sure.
They really stand out against Karl Anthony-Towns. And that's a definite, I don't want to say concern, but it's a storyline, certainly, when these teams are going to meet up. They're going to be battling for, at the very least, you would figure the number 2 spot in the East. So yeah, how he does against those guys, stays out of foul trouble. Can he can he counter it on the offensive end? If he can do that, then maybe it'll work out for New York. Overall, I'm as a Knicks fan, I'm excited about this possibility. They're clearly going all in to try and seriously compete for an NBA title. You can't fault them for that.
No doubt about that. And it should be fun to see how Karl Anthony-Towns fits in with his new team. Now, on the flip side, Bruce, what does this mean for Minnesota? I mean, the one thing I do like about this trade is Chris Finch does have prior history with Julius Randle. They spent time together in New Orleans together when Coach Finch was an assistant with the Pelicans. But overall, how do you like this fit with Randle joining the T-Wolves?
So one Kentucky guy goes from Minnesota to New York, and another Kentucky guy goes from New York to Minnesota. Obviously, if he's healthy, Randle's going to move into the starting lineup. But this was something interesting that I kind of saw online. A day or two before the trade, Knicks coach Tom Thibodeau was asked if Randle was healthy, and he replied, "I think so." Okay. So we're really not quite sure what his physical situation is. I mean, we think he's healthy, so we'll see. But he's definitely going to benefit from having a rim protector like Rudy Gobert on the court with him, because Rudy is like a security blanket for all of his teammates. It's a really interesting starting lineup. You got Ant Edwards, you got Rudy, you got Mike Conley, McDaniels, and Randle. And then you got Naz Reid, the nuclear weapon off the bench. So their top six looks really good. But the Dante DiVincenzo situation definitely is going to bear a little bit of watching here, because one of the reasons he kind of was not upset to be leaving New York is because he wasn't starting. Well, guess what? He's probably going to be a reserve in Minnesota as well. He's probably, again, he could end up working his way into the starting lineup. It could be him instead of McDaniels, whatever. But I would definitely keep my eye on that Dante situation. But, Nickeil Alexander-Walker and that rookie Rob Dillingham, those guys are going to chip in. So I think Minnesota is still, they didn't take a step back with this trade at all. I mean, I don't know that they took a step forward, but I mean, there's every reason to believe, as you said, Chris Finch and him go back a ways, that they'll make this thing work pretty well for themselves too.
Now we'll be with you being super familiar with Julius Randle's game and he liking to have the ball in his hands. And of course, one of your favorite young players in the league is Anthony Edwards, who also needs the ball in his hands. Do you have any concerns with kind of the ball movement or who's dominating the ball within that T-Wolves offense next year?
It's a definite concern. Consider this. Last season, Julius Randle, 50%, about 51% of his made field goals came off assists. He was basically half the time he was creating his own shots. Karl Anthony-Towns last season, 75%, almost 75% of his made field goals came from assists. He was the one getting the ball, getting assisted by the Mike Conleys, the Anthony Edwards. But now you have Julius Randle, who can create his own shots. That can be a benefit for your team. It's certainly going to be a different look for them. It doesn't force Anthony Edwards to try and look for Cat and stuff. Julius Randle can be that guy who create his own shot. He's also a guy who can dish it out, which will be a different situation that they're dealing with. It's going to be a different look, certainly offensively, and it may have a different look defensively. The middle is less cluttered now with Karl Anthony-Towns in the middle and Rudy Gobert there, and Naz Reid coming off the bench. I don't think I said last week that I think this is my pick to get to the NBA Finals, Minnesota. I really don't think this trade impacts my thought process right now.
I think what I like about this trade in general is the fact that obviously they traded up to get Rob Dillingham to get some backcourt depth, another point guard on this roster. But with Julius Randle and his ability to create shots for others, he's a power forward that gets a ton of assists. They might even go out there with Naz Reid and Julius Randle in the second unit at times, leaving Gobert off the bench. It's going to improve their defense, especially their mobility up front. But then after they get stops, I can see them just pushing the ball. And, if the shot clock hits 14 after some ball swings, they're going to give it to Julius Randle around the elbow, and guys are going to be cutting off of him, and he can kind of create some offense for this group when Mike Conley's not out there. So go ahead.
I was going to say that's very important. You bring up a great point there about when the offense breaks down, you don't have, and Anthony Edwards is on the court with, you don't have to go searching for Anthony Edwards to necessarily bail you out. You have Julius Randle. If things get cluttered, things run down, I can give it to him, and he can, as we've seen, create his own shot. They're not the only two people in the league, but they're probably on the team, but they're probably two of the best at it. And now it's not solely dependent on Anthony Edwards. This can absolutely work out in their favor.
And before we move on here, obviously I like the young guns in the NBA, and this could also be a potential opportunity for Leonard Miller, who hasn't gotten a lot of time yet, but was a former top pick for the Minnesota Timberwolves. Keep an eye on him. He could be the next Naz Reid surprise in Minnesota. Ooh. And now we're going to talk about a former Minnesota Timberwolves, as Derrick Rose announced his retirement this past week. And Bruce, I'll start with you. I've got a big question, and this is no disrespect to D Rose at all, but is he a Hall of Famer? He's the youngest MVP of all time, but he's also only a 3-time All-Star.
You know, it's funny. I have some thoughts on Derrick Rose, and that's included in my thoughts. So, so bear with me while I kind of share some kind of overall thoughts, and then I will answer that question. If he has an autobiography, the title of it should be What Could Have Been. Okay. He announced his retirement, as you said, after 16 NBA seasons, 6 teams, but it's not the career he should have had. He was Rookie of the Year in 08-09 at the age of 20 for his hometown Bulls. He was the MVP by his 3rd season in the league. His style of play was absolutely electric at that point in his career. I mean, when he was rolling, it looked like little lightning bolts crackled off of him when he was out there on the court. You know, but in the 2012 playoffs, as we all know, he tore the ACL in his left knee. And some feel that his style, which featured those sharp cuts, the changes in direction at full speed, and those explosive hops, contributed to that injury. And he never really was the same after that, although he had a bunch of really good seasons. And don't get me wrong, he had a lot of them after the injury, and several with World B's Knicks as a reserve. But he never regained the place that he occupied at age 22. But if D Rose had been able to sustain his early brilliance, he'd be a shoo-in for the Hall of Fame.
Oh, yeah.
But I still think he belongs there. And hopefully, when people understand the grit and desire that it took for this guy to play 16 seasons and overcome so much, they'll give him the respect that he deserves. So yes, Ross, I feel Derrick Rose is a Hall of Famer.
Will B, what's your take?
I'm not completely sold on it. I wouldn't dismiss it. I'm not completely sold on it. The other thing to consider, too, with Derrick Rose, this is the Basketball Hall of Fame, and he had, at University of Memphis, one of the all-time great freshman seasons in NCAA history, which should not be left off when doing the Derrick Rose resume. He led Memphis to a national title game and darn near lost in overtime, but it was no fault of his, other than, well, I guess suppose he did miss some free throws down the stretch. So I guess you could put a little bit on him, but he absolutely was a dominant freshman there at Memphis. When I think of Derrick Rose, and Bruce brought up the point, consider that by the age of 23, he'd already been a Rookie of the Year, an MVP, and a 3-time All-Star. That's pretty good start to an NBA career. I look at his career, and bear with me for a second, in the same manner that Dwight Gooden, the former baseball player from the New York Mets, had. He came on to the baseball and dominated early on. He was a Cy Young Award winner by his 2nd season. He looked like he was going to dominate the league for decades to come. He got messed up with a drug problem, and it basically was never the same pitcher after he returned. After he returned, he had some really good seasons, but was never the same after that. Derrick Rose, his problems were of course injuries, but his start to his career was in a very similar trajectory like Dwight Gooden. They were going to be the face of this league for years to come. And one reason or another, it just didn't work out that way. Derrick Rose was never the same after his injuries. I always remember the game he had in 2018 on Halloween when his first start of the year for Minnesota, and he went up for 50.
Yeah.
That was unbelievable. I remember it so well. And Bruce remembers the great playoff series they had was it 09, Bruce? Was that the playoff series?
I'm not sure.
It was, I mean, all the games that went to overtime, the Bulls and the Celtics, it was just really a magical run for them. And so he's had a great, great career. I don't know if it's Hall of Fame worthy, but I think if he gets in, it's hardly the crime of the century.
Yeah. And Bruce, I liked your title for his autobiography, What Could Have Been, because I'll share a quick story with you all here. The Bucks came one ping pong ball away on the combination on draft night of getting the number 1 pick over the Chicago Bulls. It was the last ping pong ball for the combination for the pick, and we struck out. So what could have been for the Milwaukee Bucks if they had Derrick Rose back then as well. But with that, we'll go ahead and take a quick break and come back with you for the second half. And we're back here on 48 Minutes, and let's head out to the West Coast as we get some news out of Clipperland. And stop me if you've heard this before. Kawhi Leonard has been held out of drills and might not start training camp on time. Bruce, are you surprised to hear that?
Well, apparently at Media Day on Monday, he said he feels good, which, means absolutely nothing. Yeah. But, remember the Zaza rule? The unofficial title for the rule change for the 2017-18 NBA season concerning reckless closeouts towards a shooter intended to disrupt a shot or prevent a pass. Well, the Zaza Pachulia rule was named, of course, for Zaza, whose action against Kawhi Leonard in the 2017 playoffs inspired it. While Kawhi has had a Hall of Fame career, I mean, there's no question about that. He won chips in 14 and 19, NBA Finals MVP both times, but his career has been plagued by injuries. I mean, pretty much every year he missed a lot of games. It was recently announced that due to right knee problems, he's going to participate in limited drills as training camp opens. Now, last year, to the surprise of many, he played in 68 games, which exceeded the 65 that were required to qualify for NBA awards and some other incentives. It was probably more than he would have liked to have played. And, there are obvious reasons that he wanted to do it. You can't be all NBA if you don't play 65 games. So he had to get past that threshold. It was, so I don't know if he's going to be able to do that this year and give Ty Lue everything he has. Hopefully he can, because if he can't, I already figured it was going to be a long season for the Clippers, but it could be a long season for the Clippers if Kawhi Leonard is playing like half the games this year.
Very long season. Now, you've always been kind of the more optimistic Clipper fan, I should say. So if you're a Clippers fan, let's put you in their shoes real quick. How are you navigating Kawhi moving forward? I mean, they've been dealing with this for years now, but How are you going to keep the expectations low, or are you expecting to see a whole different player this season?
I would think you'd be in your best interest to have lower expectations, given what has happened to him since the end of the season. As Bruce mentioned, he was heading for a spectacular run. He had 68 games, everything was looking great. Then the knee problems acted up, and he couldn't participate in the postseason. It's like the 4th straight year he hasn't been fully available for the postseason. That's a real big problem. That's not at all what the Clippers were expecting. On the other hand, they gave him a humongous contract last January. So, it's on you guys, buyer beware. The good news is Kawhi on Monday talked about how he wants to be in the lineup by opening night, that it is his goal. And it's a nice goal, but there's no guarantee. The bad news is he also said his knee inflammation could be a problem for him the rest of his career. So that doesn't sound like somebody who's ready to be an all-NBA performer the rest of his career.
Yeah. Well, when it comes to Kawhi Leonard, I'm not buying it. I just don't trust the guy at this point. And some of it is just unfortunate luck and injury. But we'll have to stay tuned to see what happens with that. Now, moving on to the media world here, ESPN had a big layoff last week as well, and that was with the dismissal of Zach Lowe. Bruce, do you have more on that?
Well, if it's an ESPN topic, I'm contractually obligated to give my opinion on it. So here goes. Zach Lowe is the latest NBA free agent. He was laid off last week after more than a decade at ESPN. I guess he was making too much money. They say it was in 7 figures, and that's big money. But one of the reasons, I mean, I was a big part of their NBA coverage for more than 20 years. And one of the reasons for our success was the creative minds of people like Zach Lowe and some others who are no longer there, like Jeff Van Gundy, Mark Jackson, and many others. Some of them are still there, like our favorite guy, Tim Legler. Newsbreakers like Mark Stein and later on Adrian Wojnarowski, both now gone from there, pushed the envelope even further. But even though there is still excellence in NBA coverage at ESPN, Mike Breen, Monica McNutt, Doris Burke, Bobby Marks, Cassidy Hubbarth, Mark Kestisher, PJ Carlissimo, the super producer of their games, Tim Corrigan, and there are others. Things are looking and feeling a bit hollowed out in Bristol at this point with all the departures of those people. Look, clickbaity takes, which we're seeing way more of there now, are like cheap calories. Zach Lowe takes were straight protein, okay? ESPN could send a great message by putting Legler on the A team, replacing JJ Redick, because if they did something like that, they would show that they still respect intelligent and substantive hoop content, as well as respecting their viewers.
I certainly agree with that take there, Bruce. Thanks for sharing your inside perspective, being our ESPN expert here. World what's your thoughts on this? I know last year you had your concerns and frustrations with the whole Stephen A experience during the Knicks playoff run, but sure seems like we're going to be getting a lot more Stephen A type pre-games this year. So curious if you'll be tuned into the pre-game shows and how you see ESPN moving forward.
Consider this. A year ago at this time, Adam Silver held his State of the League press conference, and he was kind of critical about the way NBA was being covered. His sport was being covered. And now you go ahead and now, you get rid of a premier writer from a network that just gave billions to this league. And the whole thing does not make sense to me. If it's a money issue, it's a money issue. That's fine. But I don't think he was breaking the bank, and I don't understand how ESPN can be really taken seriously with their basketball coverage going forward when people like Zach Lowe are shown the door. It screams of, we don't care about the integrity of our coverage anymore. We just want you to have your eyeballs on us no matter what. So we'll provide as much shock value, allow for as much shock value time as possible.
Now, Bruce, one follow-up question I have for you here is, could this just be a year where we get maybe mid-grade coverage from ESPN, but by laying off Zach Lowe, Woj deciding to leave ESPN, are they just shedding salary now to maybe take a swing at some of these TNT personalities that should become available?
I suppose that's possible. But look, I mean, Shams Charania is also a free agent out there. Yep. And he is like, Woj's mini-me. And look, obviously, I can't imagine ESPN hasn't reached out to his agent to say, hey, because Shams is now the number one, newsbreaker amongst the Woj crowd, if you will. They do have other people there that do some of that, but Shams is more high profile than any of them. So I could see them going after him. But to me, the big decision that will tell me what they want to be as an NBA vehicle is, what do they do with the A team? Breen is good to go. Doris is good to go. I've heard Richard Jefferson. I like Richard Jefferson. I think he's fun on NBA Today. He's clever. He's got a good sense of humor. He's young. He's hip. But he's never said anything that comes close to the kind of analysis that Tim Legler gives you. So For me, I'm not claiming to be objective here. I've been friends with Legs for more than 20 years, and I've said a million times he's the best analyst that they have, but he's never really been appreciated by his bosses. And I hope that they've kind of realized that the best thing they have has been hiding in plain sight there. And if they were to put him at the very top of the pecking order, along with Doris and Breeny, they will get all kinds of great reaction from the fans. I think the fans will love it.
Yeah, that would be outstanding to get Legler on the A team there. So let's cross our fingers that happens. Now, before we move forward here, World B, you and I are kind of our baseball guys on the podcast. Your Mets are in the wild card, the Padres are in the wild card. So kind of going back to what Bruce said about Shams, obviously he's a free agent. He is now the head reporter for Breaking News, but there was a rumor swirling that Jeff Passan of ESPN, who does all the baseball reporting, might switch over to basketball. I found that extremely strange and also kind of odd. I don't think that'd be a good fit, but wanted to quickly get your thoughts on that rumor.
It would definitely be an unusual situation. I don't know what his contacts are like. He may already have everybody in place, and that's what it comes down to with people like Shams and Woj, are the ability to have great contacts. I don't know what Jeff's are. If they're impeccable, then it won't be a bad transition at all. It's certainly possible. We love both sports. Why can't Jeff love both sports? I don't know what his angle is for the NBA. Shams would be a natural fit to replace Woj at ESPN, but then again, you just saved yourself about $20 million on Woj's contract, reportedly, and you let Zach Lowe go, who was making considerably less, and now you're going to just spend money and get Shams back. I really don't understand how that all works. From a production standpoint, it would make sense to bring Shams in and give him whatever deal you get. That would certainly restore some credibility to your coverage. I don't know. If Jeff has the contacts, he would be. I don't think it'd be that big of a deal. It'd be unusual, but it won't be that big of a deal because he's an excellent writer and he breaks really great stories for their baseball coverage.
Yep, no doubt. He is one of the best reporters.
Speaking of baseball, there was another significant death today. Pete Rose passed away, the all-time hit king. I had lots of experiences with Pete Rose in the early 1980s when I was covering baseball. I absolutely loved the guy. He treated me great. He was great to work with. I know that he had all the scandals. And I've often said that he will never make it into the Hall of Fame while he's alive because the powers that be would never allow him to have his moment in the sun where he's standing at the podium in Cooperstown giving a speech. But now that he's gone and he can't have that moment, I do expect that within 2 years he will be in Cooperstown.
Wow. Yeah, and definitely a sad day in sports today with the storylines with the passing of Dikembe Mutombo and Pete Rose. But let's go ahead and get to some more positive storylines and discuss some top storylines heading into the NBA season. World B, I'll go ahead and start with you. What was the top storyline you're looking forward to this season?
Well, we talked about it at the top of the show. Obviously, I'm a little biased as a fan, but I'm really looking forward to seeing the 76ers Knicks try and compete against the Celtics. I think that's going to make the Eastern Conference really interesting. And I really want to see both teams went all in or made serious commitments, at least, to try and challenge the Celtics. And let's see if they can live up to that. We know the Celtics can live up to the pressure of expectation. We saw them do it last year when they went and got Porzingis, when they went and got Drew Holiday. They had a lot of expectations on them, and they dominated the league. They can handle the hype. Let's see if the Knicks can do it. Let's see if the 76ers. Neither franchise has gone past the second round of the playoffs in a couple of decades. So this is new territory for them, to be honest. Let's see if they can live up to the hype. It's going to be really interesting with these three teams, I think.
Bruce?
Well, I think the Knicks are clearly the second best team, and you never know what could happen with injuries, whatever. Porzingis is missing a bunch of time at the start of the season. But I see Philly as kind of like on eggshells a bit because of health, really. I mean, with Embiid, you just never really know. Paul George has certainly had injuries over the years. If they were to lose one of those guys for significant time, Milwaukee bounces right past them into the third spot. So I was going to talk about the Celtics for my storyline, and I will. But I think I think the Knicks are sitting pretty, and Philly, if healthy, is going to that conference will be exactly as you described it, World B. Really interesting to have 3, maybe even 4, if you count Milwaukee, championship contenders, just going at each other all season. It's going to be
totally
good.
agree.
Yeah, I would not sleep on the Milwaukee Bucks. That when you started mentioning the other teams, I think they're hungry. They like being under the radar right now. The one question I have with the Bucks moving forward, though, is we've got some news with Chris Middleton that he still hasn't been cleared to play, and that's a big if for Milwaukee. If they're going to compete with the teams like New York, like Boston, like Philly, Chris Middleton's got to be a big part of that. So hopefully, some good news is around the corner for Chris Middleton and the Bucks. Bruce, what's your storyline?
The last franchise to repeat as NBA champion was Golden State in 2018. In reality, that should have been a 4-peat, if not for dumbass Draymond Green getting himself suspended for Game 5 in 2016, opening the door for a 3-game comeback by Cleveland. Because after they won that chip in 2015, they went 73-9 that year, and they were cruising. They were up 3-1 on the Cavs. But thanks to Draymond, not only did they not repeat, they didn't 4-peat, even though they did, win the next 2. So only one franchise this year has a chance to repeat, and it's the Boston Celtics. I know everyone loves the Knicks and the Sixers, and both have improved a lot. But I think Boston is still the clear favorite. They're the first championship team in memory that starts the season with such a massive chip on their collective shoulder between Tatum in the Olympics and Brown not making the Olympics. Someone will come out of the West and play Boston in the finals, but this Celtics team is built to last. And if they do repeat this season, we could be looking at not 2, not 3, et cetera, moving forward.
Yeah, well, they got some contenders out east looking to kind of kick them off the pedestal here, and going to have some big challengers there. World B, did you have a chance to see that Jason Tatum has tried to fix his 3-point shot? He had a little hitch in it, and now he's getting it off a little quicker. Did you happen to catch that on Twitter?
Actually, I did. I did see that. Yeah. Good for him if he can improve it. Because last season when we did our predictions, he was going to be my MVP. He was my choice to win the MVP last season. Didn't quite work out that way. And then he had just his reputation took a kind of a hit there during the Olympics with his lack of playing time, and then his performance in the finals and things like that. There's anybody in this league that is going to have a bounce back season, or should have, play with a chip on their shoulder this season, it is Jason Tatum, to prove a lot of people wrong.
Yep, absolutely. And as for my storyline, I'm going a little off script here, but it is recent news and a big storyline for me personally, and that is Vince Carter. As I have my game-worn wristband here for our YouTube viewers. And it's a bummer that the New Jersey Nets had to beat the Toronto Raptors to the punch with a jersey retirement announcement, as the Nets announced they'll be retiring Carter's number 15 into the Raptors on January 25th against the Miami Heat. But last week, we got an even bigger one, as Raptors team president Masai Ujiri surprised Vince Carter by letting Vince know that the franchise plans on retiring his jersey on November 2nd. So it will actually come before the Nets Raptor night. And that's pretty well timed, since he did start his career with the Toronto Raptors. And being a big-time Vince Carter fan, I questioned whether or not this day would ever come. Would the Raptors ever retire number 15, given how ugly the exit was for Vince? But the interest and impact he brought to the entire country in the early 2000s is unquestionable. And you don't have to take my word for it. Just go ahead and take a look at Team Canada's roster and all the Canadian players we've seen over the past couple of years, because those were the childhood kids that grew up watching their parents watching the games. They're watching this guy fly high in the air, and just glad that Vince Carter is going to be getting his flowers in Toronto, because it's a hot take by me. I'm not sure if the Toronto Raptors are around today if it wasn't for Vince. I think just the interest he brought to the game of basketball was so big, and what's not to say that the Toronto Raptors without Vince didn't end up being just like the Vancouver Grizzlies. So I think Vince had a lot to do with the Raptors having some stability. Obviously, they now have a title thanks to Mr. Kawhi Leonard, who we discussed earlier. But rest assured, November 2nd is already circled on my calendar, as Vince Carter will have his number retired by the Toronto Raptors, and it's going to be an emotional yet well-deserved night for the man they once called Air Canada.
It's funny. There's really how many guys have had their jersey retired by 3 different franchises? I mean, I know obviously Michael Jordan has, and Bill Russell, of course, the entire league. LeBron eventually will, because Cleveland, Miami, and the Lakers will all retire his jersey. And then there's Vince, but I don't really know off the top of my head any others.
Yeah, well, Vince is only getting 2. He'll get the Nets and the Raptors, but I don't think any other teams warranted as his career moved on. But those 2 definitely were well deserved. So should be a lot of fun there. Any thoughts on Vince World B before we close out tonight's show?
You said it perfectly. He put a lack of a better phrase, a national face on the franchise. He made that a league-wide name in the same manner as the Knicks, in the same manner as the Celtics at that time. That was one of the teams back then when he played. Vince Carter did that. I totally agree with you. That franchise maybe does not succeed without Vince Carter's presence. And it is good to see him get his number retired. He was that important, not only to the Raptors as a franchise, but basketball in Canada. Absolutely. I think it's well deserved. And, I saw his reaction to it. It was very emotional for him. So, time does a great job at healing wounds. And this is clearly a good example of that.
Absolutely. And quick fun fact here, selfishly, if I could, my dream guest on the 48 Minutes podcast, now that we've had Giannis, is actually Vince Carter. So hopefully we can make that happen one day as he continues his media career. I think we're going to have a better shot down the line, but certainly one of my personal goals for the show. But with that will do it for this edition of the 48 Minutes podcast on Believe, presented by BetOnline. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll be back with you next week to be sure you're up to date in 48 on all things around the association. Take care, everyone.